And the last video in the Battle with Grendel lesson is just going to be this last little bit that ends the battle between Beowulf and Grendel.
Yet his time had come, his days were over, his death near. Down the hill he would go, swept groaning and helpless to the waiting hands of still worse fiends. Now he discovered, once the afflicter of men, tormentor of their days, what it meant to feud with Almighty God. Grendel saw that his strength was deserting him, his claws bound fast. Higlac's brave follow tearing at his hands. The monster's hatred rose higher, but his power had gone. He twisted in pain, and the bleeding sinews deep in his shoulders snapped, muscle and bone split and broke. The battle was over. Beowulf had been granted new glory. Grendel escaped, but wounded as he was, could flee to his den, his miserable hole at the bottom of the marsh, only to die, to wait for the end of all his days.
All right, so let's look at this part. In this, when it says, and yet his time had come at the very top of your screen. His time had come. That means that's foreshadowing. That's saying this is the end. His days were over. So let's look at how Beowulf kills Grendel, how he defeats Grendel. If you look at this part right here, Higlac's brave follower, by the way, that's Beowulf. Because remember, Higlac is his cousin and his king. So whenever it says he right here, this is Grendel. So it's important that you are paying attention to these things. All right, so Beowulf was tearing at his hands. Beowulf had Grendel caught. And it says he, meaning Grendel, twisted in pain, and the bleeding sinews deep in his shoulder snapped, muscle and bone split and broke. So this means that he ripped off not just his arm, but everything in his shoulder snapped. Everything, he completely ripped off not just his arm, but his shoulder and everything. And we know that it was over, but we know that Beowulf actually won because it says Beowulf had been granted new glory. And then this part right here confirms the fact that Grendel died because it says Grendel escaped. So Grendel left Herod, but wounded as he was, could flee to his den, his miserable hole at the bottom of the marsh, only to die. So we get that Grendel dies. And then this is how he dies. Right here. This is how Beowulf wins. He ripped his arm off. All right, so let's continue on with this last little bit.
And after that bloody combat, the Danes laughed with delight. He who had come to them from across the sea, bold and strong-minded, had driven affliction off, purged Herod clean. He was happy now with that night's fierce work. The Danes had been served as he'd boasted he'd served them. Beowulf, prince of the Geats, had killed Grendel, ended the grief, the sorrow, the suffering forced on Hrothgar's helpless people by a bloodthirsty fiend. No Dane doubted the victory, for the proof, hanging high from the rafters of Beowulf coming, was the monster's arm, claw, and shoulder, and hook.
All right, so what we really get from this portion is, I underline again, Grendel was killed. So Beowulf killed Grendel. Let's get a couple of things from this. One thing I want you to get is that the Danes laughed with delight. So this shows the joy. Well, let's get that right. This shows their joy, their happiness. And then the very bottom, this shows you that what Beowulf did as proof. It says, no Dane doubted the victory, for the proof hanging high from the rafters where Beowulf had hung it was the monster's arm, claw, shoulder, and all. And Beowulf does this as proof that Grendel has been defeated. All right, so it's just proof that Grendel is dead. No Dane doubted the victory. He hung the monster's arm, claw, shoulder, and all from the rafters inside of Herod. All right, and so that is the end of the battle with Grendel, and that's all we're going to be reading from Beowulf. There are actually 3 parts to Beowulf. These are just a few excerpts from part 1, which is the battle with Grendel. Part 2 is the battle with his mother. And then part 3 is the battle with the dragon. And there's actually a Beowulf Clash of the Gods that will go through and link some of this stuff to history and also go through and explain all 3 parts so you can see how it all comes together. But for the sake of being able to annotate and really dig deep into this, we're just reading this portion.